in case it's difficult to interpret my message here, I really love this author. Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to find out if Anya Ahlborn is one of my favorite authors. Recently I've been talking about series ideas and experiments I want to do on this channel, one of which is finally figuring out who my favorite authors are. I don't know if you guys think that I'm really well read, but spoiler alert, I'm not. If I'm well read in anything, it's probably romance, because that's the genre that I've been reading for the longest. However, it's not the genre that I read the most of anymore. I read a lot of thrillers, mystery thrillers, and I read horror as well. I really haven't had a chance to establish any author loyalty in those genres. So my favorite books of those genres are written by folks that I have never read before. I've never read any of their other work. For instance, The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. I love that thriller, but it's the only Peter Swanson book I've read so far. Or The One by John Mars is the only John Mars book that I've read so far. Those are favorites. I love those books. Another example is Brother by Anya Ahlborn. This is my absolute favorite horror novel that I've read so far, but I'm hesitant to tell anybody that Anya Ahlborn's my favorite author because this is the only Anya Ahlborn book I had read until now. So in order to figure it out, I read 4 additional Anya Ahlborn books. I started with The Shuddering, then I read The Bird Eater, then I read Seed, and then I read The Neighbors. 2 of those books I really, really liked. One of them I kind of liked, and one of them I didn't particularly care for. So I'll tell you more about those books a bit later in this video. First, let's talk about Brother, in case you haven't heard me gush about it before. Brother is the story of the Morrow family living in rural West Virginia, and one of their family members is teenager Michael. He was adopted by the Morrows when he was 4, I believe, 4 or 5, and pulled into the family fold and has been raised with the Morrows' beliefs. Although the Morrows' beliefs and actions don't really set that well with Michael. So the book is about Michael coming to the realization that this isn't what he wants for his life and daring to dream about things other than this old rickety farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia, and trying to extricate himself from the situation, trying to get away. If you're a horror fan, if you're a dark fiction fan, if you're not squeamish, I highly, highly, highly recommend Brother, which incidentally still is my favorite Anya Ahlborn book. This particular book contains everything that I now think Anya Ahlborn does well. And it's funny because some of the books that I like are pretty polarizing. People either love these books or they hate these books. Brother is one of them. Incidentally, The Bird Eater by Anya Ahlborn is another. But what I feel like Anya Ahlborn does really well is she writes pretty simple, kind of understated horror novels. These books are not ostentatious. They do not try too hard to get your attention. They do not try too hard to shock you. One of my pet peeves in horror actually is the shock value factor. How a lot of horror novels or horror authors, their goals seem to be to shock you, and sometimes they utilize events or characters, etc., in their books that don't necessarily fit well, but they're there in order to shock the reader even further. I hate that. And Anya Ahlborn is not that kind of author. Her books are not in any way going to compete with the goriest of horror. They're not even going to compete with the scariest of horror. I think that Anya Ahlborn books are chilling. what's great about this author is that she doesn't tell me what feelings to feel. She tells me a story and lets me feel about it however I want to. You know, it's just not forced. It's just an easygoing kind of writing. They're easygoing stories. Very realistic. That's the other thing, is that even her creature horror, even her stories about things that we know don't exist, still feels very realistic. Her characters are realistic. The way that she tells a story is just like, there's just this ease. There's just this ease about her writing that just really gets me excited, in case you cannot tell. Anya Ahlborn seems like this omniscient sort of person who's like, come here, let me show you something. You know, her books are like snapshots. We go with her, we follow her to this location, this setting, which always plays an important role in an Anya Ahlborn book, by the way. But we go to this location, this setting, and she opens the door and lets us look in on some of the awful things happening in the world at that moment. And we watch, we observe, and then she quietly shuts the door on the story and lets us go on our way. Now, one of the controversial parts of Anya Ahlborn's books are her endings. I'm not going to specifically spoil anything, but I will tell you that Anya Ahlborn writes pretty ambiguous endings. Her books don't necessarily end. There are some things left unanswered. There are some open-ended issues. I'm not going to say that these things are plot holes or these things are accidental. I mean, I feel like this is very intentional. And I, for one, like it. But there are a lot of people out there who hate it. And I can absolutely understand that. I know all types of readers, and I know that there are readers out there who want everything resolved. They want to be walked through the entire book from beginning to end. They want to see how it all pans out. They just need that resolution. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm not a fan of leaving me with questions. But when it comes to these books by Anya Ahlborn, I feel like the ambiguous endings leave them in my hands. I feel like that makes them more interactive. I feel like I have the creative power at that point to decide exactly what happens. For instance, in Brother. Okay, let me put it this way. We don't witness the deaths of a couple of key players of the novel. However, it's implied that they're not in great shape when the novel ends. So at that point, it's up to me as the reader to decide. If I have to make myself feel better about the book by saying that, you know, they find a way out of the hills and go off and live happily ever after, then that's fine. If I'm okay with the darkness of the novel in general, and I want to decide that it really is as bleak as it looks, and they both drop dead right then and there, like, I mean, that's okay too. I think it's clever. I also think that it's kind of cool. I think that Anya Ahlborn always begins her books with this amazing sense of hope. You know, her characters are always on the up. Like, her characters are starting something new, or her characters are about to take a bold, brand new step in a different direction. Or, for instance, in The Shuddering, one of the main characters is about to make a big move to Europe. He's moving abroad, and there's all this hope for his future. Likewise, in The Neighbors, the main character has made the decision to leave behind people in his life that are dragging him down, and he's moving out onto his own to start a whole new life for himself. So all of Anya Ahlborn's books begin with this hope, this mission, this positivity. And throughout the book, she bats the reader around like a cat between positive hopefulness and bleak devastation. I personally don't have any criticisms, really, of her work, but I can tell you that I do understand other people's criticisms of her work. The ambiguous endings or not going far enough. I mean, for a lot of horror readers, this is not going to be far enough. Her books are chilling and disturbing, but some folks are going to see them as watered down, probably. People do have a tendency to think that she's a little bit repetitive, both within a book itself and from book to book. It has never bothered me. I've read 5 now and read them really close together, back to back, and I didn't have any issues with the repetition. I think that the book that I like the least, which I'll get into, I feel like it borrowed from Brother, or Brother borrowed from it. I'm not sure which came first. I would have to look into that. I feel pretty comfortable saying that, yes, I really enjoy Anya Ahlborn. She's definitely auto-buy. Let's put it that way. Like when an Anya Ahlborn book comes out, I will buy it. So let's talk about the books that I read. First, as mentioned, I read The Shuddering. This is the story of a friend group getting together in the Colorado mountains for a ski trip because Ryan, our main character, is getting ready to move abroad. He has a twin sister named Jane who tags along, and Jane's best friend Lauren, who's attracted to Ryan, and Ryan's best friend Sawyer, who is the ex-boyfriend of Jane. He comes with his new girlfriend, pregnant April. There's tension among the friend group. There's a bit of awkwardness among the friend group as it is. What they don't know is that there is a pack of creatures who hunt, kill, and consume human beings when it snows. I'm not a gigantic fan of creature horror. It doesn't do it for me. So I didn't expect to love The Shuddering, just knowing that creature horror was not my cup of tea, but I liked it. I liked it in spite of it being creature horror. There were a couple of things that didn't appeal to me at first, but now that I've read 3 more, it's less of a problem. Coming off of Brother, I probably expected certain things. There's some characters in this book who I think are a little over dramatized. They are a bit caricature-ish, but they're minor characters. They don't mean anything to the plot. So just a couple of weeks out from having read this, it doesn't bother me the way that it did when I first got done with the book. The Shuddering has one of those will they, won't they, hopeful, dreaded, back and forth plots like Brother does, where, you know, you're really not sure how this is going to turn out, because there's moments where you feel very hopeful as the reader for all of these characters, and then there's other moments where you just know they're all doomed to a painful, horrible death. And it also has an ambiguous ending. There are a couple of unanswered questions at the end of this book. I can understand how that might drive somebody crazy. So know that if you're interested in reading The Shuddering. It is also probably I hesitate to say goriest, because I don't know that it is. It just has the most frequent instances of death and gore. Some of Anya Ahlborn's books, you wait for a while for anything horrific to happen. In The Shuddering, it opens with a scene of utter gore and horror, and there's sprinkled throughout the book. I'm gonna go ahead and I give this one 3 stars. Like I said, the creature horror thing is holding it back for me, but I like the ending of this. Next, after that, I read The Bird Eater. This one and the next that I'm going to talk about are my favorites of this project. So, The Bird Eater is about a guy named Aaron who was growing up being raised by his aunt in this farmhouse in Arkansas. And he came home one day to find his aunt had died mysteriously, and she was the last one. His uncle had died before that. He thinks his mother ran off to Hollywood, but in reality, she had died in that house before that. So he gets shipped off, gets married, has a family. Tragedy strikes, and he goes through a period of alcoholism and grief and just really hits a low. And his therapist suggests visiting the old farmhouse to at least lay those layers of grief to rest. Aaron goes back to Arkansas and he reconnects with some old friends. He also moves right into this farmhouse, but the farmhouse is a little bit creepy. Several people have died there. There must be something going on. This is a haunted house story, but I don't like using that term, haunted house story. I feel like that applies a layer of cheesiness that this book doesn't deserve. I mean, this is a very malevolent, malicious haunted house story, and because of the energy in the house, Aaron descends into utter insanity. It's just gross. This book is disgustingly gross. It's gross and it's scary and creepy. I think that this book has the strongest imagery of any of the books that I read for this little experiment, which there's nothing wrong with Anya Ahlborn's imagery. I think that it's great, but this is like 3D Technicolor, which is probably not that great anymore. Like, what am I saying? This is like Ultra HD imagery. Aging myself. But this is a 4-star book for me easily. Next, I read 2 books. I don't have physical copies to show you, but the first is Seed. This is the story of Jack Winter and his family. He has a wife and 2 young girls, 10 years old and 6 years old. They live in Louisiana, and Jack is a mechanic by day, mechanical or technical tradesman by day. He's also a musician by night, and he and his wife, sometimes struggle to make ends meet, but they're doing the best that they can. And one night, a presence from Jack's past interrupts a trip in the car, and things begin to change. So I have a lot of questions about Seed. I loved Seed. So this is a story of demonic possession. And basically, we know that Jack was once the possessed, and now, after this car accident, his youngest daughter, Charlotte, is possessed. So we know that's what it is, but I guess by the end of the book, the origins or the reasons why are still kind of unclear. And yet I still really liked this story. This was short. It was short and to the point, and was kind of the most successful at keeping me on the edge of my seat. I have a problem with scary children. Like, scary children scare me more than a lot of other things scare me. And Charlotte definitely turns into a scary child. But it's basically like demonic possession that's passed down from father to daughter. So then you also have to wonder, well, was Jack's father possessed? But the book doesn't go into that, so I can't tell you the answer. But again, another hopeful yet devastating story where you just want things so badly to work out for everybody, but most of the time it doesn't look like that's going to happen. And another ambiguous ending, so know that going into it. But The Bird Eater and Seed were my favorites behind Brother. Lastly, I read The Neighbors. This is the story of Andrew, whose mother is an agoraphobic alcoholic. And Andrew has sacrificed his entire life, his personal relationships, intimate relationships, hopes and dreams of a better future. He sacrificed everything in order to take care of his mother. And one day he just decides he's done. She's crossed the line. She's takes advantage of him. She takes him for granted, all of that stuff. So he looks up an old neighborhood friend and arranges to become his roommate. Upon moving in with his old friend, who lives in this dump of a house, he realizes that the next door neighbors are perfection personified. Their lawn is immaculate. Their house is beautiful. They mow the lawn and do the gardening in business casual attire. The wife is this beautiful pinup. She's just this iconic looking woman, and she's beautiful. And they live like June and Ward Cleaver. I mean, everything is just so perfect at the neighbor's house. And Andrew finds himself seduced by that and lured into that. He starts doing work for them, and he starts having dinners with them. Meanwhile, they're warning him about the friend that he moved in with, and the friend he moved in with is warning him about the neighbors. And there's just something not right. So this is the most disappointing book that I read. I feel like it's a 2 or 2.5 star book for me. And that's because this is the only book that I was able to say, I wish it had done this instead. It's completely subjective, and I wouldn't, expect anyone else to care how I think a book should be or shouldn't be. But to me, one of the tools that I use to rate a book and to determine if a book is a favorite of mine or falls just short or is terrible is if in my mind while I'm reading it, I'm dreaming up scenarios that the book itself never quite lives up to. And at the end of it, I'm saying, man, I wish it would have done this. This would have been way more interesting. And so that's my problem with The Neighbors. Frankly, I wish that The Neighbors had some supernatural aspect to it, like The Bird Eater or like Seed, but it didn't. Turns out The Neighbors is really just a human tragedy. A human versus human horror. I don't know. Is there a name for that? Like Brother. But it isn't as good as Brother. It's also, incidentally, while it has no supernatural aspects to it, it's also Anya Ahlborn's only, this is the only book that I can say feels even a little bit unrealistic. Even though there's nothing supernatural about it, which is, that says something about the rest of her books, especially those that do contain supernatural elements and how realistic and believable they feel. This one could happen on any road, I guess, in rural America, and yet it is a little bit far-fetched. This one just feels a tad far-fetched to me. It's also pretty uncomfortable, oddly enough. This is a really uncomfortable book to read. And she writes about things that are way more out there and unthinkable and unusual and horrifying. Yet there's aspects of The Neighbors that it's just really upsetting to read about. So again, it's just not a favorite. Just not. That said, this is obviously a one-off. I really enjoyed the other 3 books that I read for this experiment. Obviously, Brother is still elevated to favorite status and will be for the foreseeable future. So I don't think that a bad experience with one book from an author, should knock an author off their pedestal. I really do still feel like Anya Ahlborn is going to be a sound choice for me, an auto-buy choice for me. I already own physical copies of 2 additional books by her, Within These Walls and The Devil Crept In, and actually a physical copy of A Part in the Dark, which is 2 novellas combined into 1 book. Her latest release, If You See Her, I own on ebook. So all in all, what is that, 9 books by Anya Ahlborn that I own, and until this month I had only read 1, which says more about me as a reader than anything I've actually stated in this video. But this was a fun experiment because I really enjoyed the books that I was reading. If I wasn't enjoying the books that I was reading, I don't think I could have gotten through 4 of them. But as long as I'm enjoying them, then it doesn't bother me at all to sort of binge an author or a genre or a subject matter. I'm a binger by nature. When I find something I like, I want as much of it as possible immediately. And so this kind of experiment will work really well for me. As long as I like what I'm reading. If I don't, I'll quit and give up. But as far as Anya Ahlborn is concerned, definitely yes, one of my favorite authors, and I'm super excited to finally be able to say so. If you have any questions about any of the books that I mentioned, or about Anya Ahlborn, or you want to share your own thoughts about the author or any of those books, please do so. Feel free to do so in the comment section down below. I would love to continue this discussion with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.